Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we're on the Crack of Karkin playing as the forces of the Lizardmen against the Empire. And this is one of those matchups that really does not shine for the Lizards. Generally, factions with lots of AP shooting, especially black powder shooting, are a bit of a menace for the Lizardmen because they just don't have the greatest tools to deal with it. If a faction can hold the front line for an okay amount of time, the Empire black powder will generally gun down the monsters that most Lizard builds rely on. They can easily deal with other sort of large supporting units, flyers, that sort of stuff. And then at that point, your Sarge troops are just not able, even if they have managed to cleave through the front line, are just not able to push through and do enough damage. This is why dwarves are an incredibly tough fight. This is why wood elves are a relatively tough fight, and certainly why Vost is currently a horrible fight. Though to be honest, the Vampire Coast fight is heavily skewed by the fact that the deck dropper handguns are probably underpriced by a good 200 to 300 gold, which makes that match very difficult. And it's essentially just a balancing mistake on CA's part. But here in this case, Empire also pretty tough because they do have some good options to hold you up on the front line, and they've got a plethora of heavy cav and nasty shooting to really teach you a lesson. So for my build, I decided to go super wide. No monsters, no reliance on those sorts of susceptible units, and instead cavalry and infantry to carry the day. For my lord, I decided to go with the Slan Mage Priest of Heavens. I think this is a good option if you're just trying to go super wide and relatively very relatively here safe. The Slan Mage Priest is pretty susceptible to getting sniped. He does have some missile resist, 40%, which is very respectable, and he does have 5600 HP, which is great. But his melee stats are trash, and he's a huge target that's slow and can't maneuver. So generally, shooting and melee will still do a good number on him, but it will take down a decent amount of your opponent's focus fire to really get through. Otherwise, the Slan Mage Priest is kind of a really solid supporting caster lord. He's kind of like Balthazar Guild. You can spam a bunch of spells, spam a bunch of supporting abilities, and be really useful for your army. So in this case, we do have Banishment as well as the Bellowed Statue of Spite to give us some damaging abilities. We do have the Aura of Quetzal as well as the Shield of the Old Ones to give us some AoE buffs for our army. And then we do have the Curse of the Midnight Wind, Wind Blast, as well as Harmonic Convergence. So a decent selection of spells. Wind Blast to counteract enemies shooting, and it's like Sterling's Revenge, handgunners, that sort of stuff. And then, if Overcast, even units like Great Swords will actually suffer pretty badly under its effects. Harmonic Convergence to buff our troops, and Curse of the Midnight Wind to debuff enemy troops in critical fights, like say cavalry duels on the flank, maybe shutting down Great Swords, that sort of thing. Supporting, we do have two King Chiefs. These guys are partially there to poke away at enemy lords, heroes, cavalry, enemy shooting to an extent as well. Perhaps they can blitz through the enemy line, try to get on top of artillery pieces even in melee. They're obviously not a good melee hero at all, but they can get in there and be a nuisance. But more importantly, we did actually bring them for their good old Cold-Blooded, which stops Rampage and gives you some extra leadership, which is nifty when I'm going so heavy on cav, as you will shortly see. They can also pick apart Outriders, which is one of the biggest threats to this build, in my opinion, or the Lizardmen in general. It's because there's not too many counters you have to Outriders. For our front line, we do have 3 units of Sarge Warriors with shields. These guys will dumpster any state trooper except Great Swords, so Great Swords are the only real counter to these guys for Empire infantry line. Now, Great Swords will do a very good number on them, but with buffs and debuffs, you do have an okay chance there. On the periphery, we do have some Skink Cohorts. These guys are there to soften up enemy cavalry charges for my actual cavalry. They're there to tie down enemy shooting, to tie down enemy spears. They're just a general utility flanker. They're very good for it. They're 46 speed, and they do have some survivability and some stats, especially with a few chevrons pumped into them. On either flank, we do have a mirror lineup of Feral Cold Ones, Speed Riders, and Horned Ones. You might be wondering what the logic is behind this besides just going super wide. Well, Feral Cold Ones, dirt cheap, so they're kind of a throwaway unit. If I need to shut down a shooting piece, I can throw them right at it. If I need to block off an enemy cav charge, I can throw the Feral Cold Ones into it, while the Cold One Spear Riders or the Horn Ones can actually get in and do some good work. For the rest of it, it's just a universally decent unit, the Horn Ones, and then the Cold One Spear Riders to give me a dedicated anti-large unit. They're not quite, I actually think they are worse than Horn Ones against large, but these guys do have the benefit of being pretty cheap, and they can counter, say, things like Reichsguard on a budget. And although their charge bonus is pretty trash nowadays, they still do have just monstrous sustained melee stats, and with that AP, I'm pretty sure they beat most, if not all, Shock Cav in their price bracket in a 1v1 fight. I think only maybe Boar Boy Big Guns and maybe Cold One Knights beat these guys in their price bracket. Maybe Questing Knights, but that's like the only 3 cav, which isn't really that much when you think about it. Same thing on the other flank, and then we do have a single unit of Chameleon Skinks. And you can see we are immediately closing in because my opponent did bring some artillery, so we can't afford to be sitting and tearing around for too long. But that said, the shape of this map does allow me to keep my cavalry forces down below my opponent's arc of fire, so that his Hammer of Witches, which he brought here to harass me, can't really get good shots. So it's forced to fire on useless targets, or, well, less useful targets like the Source Warriors over there. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any healing, but my opponent is not actually exploiting that, which, in my opinion, he should have. He should probably start pounding my Salon Mage Priest immediately. But perhaps worried about that magic resist, or that missile resist, he is not doing so currently. For the rest of my opponent's build, frontline mix of spears as well as greatswords. Very good choice in my opinion. Spears will hold really well against state troops. They'll do okay against skinks, and they'll obviously they're anti-large, so they'll do some function against cav. They can help support his own cav in the cav fight, which is something I think people don't necessarily always utilize, or they don't underestimate. But the impact pulling infantry into a cav fight can have is huge. If you have infantry on top of cavalry, the enemy cav can't really retreat as effectively because they'll get chased down by your own cav, but at the same time they don't want to stay in there because they're in a losing battle because of your infantry support. My opponent did bring Karl Franz here, stripped down, so he's got Foe Seeker as well as Gall Miraz and Hold the Line, all very good skills, though personally I do like bringing the Reichland Runefang. I think it's very nifty on Karl. He also does have a Jade Wizard down here with Regrowth, Earthblood, Life Bloom, and the Power Stone, all very good abilities and all very good heals, especially when you bring such elite troops like Demigryphs and Karl. It can be a huge boon. Finally, some shooting, handguns as well as the silver bullets. Absolutely brutal. They will simply annihilate, especially large monsters. But even against cav, and even if my Salon Mage Priest finds himself in a bad spot, they will do an absolutely tremendous job on him, and it's not something you want to be caught out by. So I think this is a very respectable build, and honestly, yeah, this is a solid Empire build against Lizardmen. Not necessarily quite what I'd bring, but there are a few little things, little changes I'd probably bring. Maybe not bring that many Demigryphs, but still very, very solid and very respectable. Now you can see I'm immediately pushing forward, trying to get my Chameleon Skinks in there to get a few pot shots into the handguns, into spears, that sort of stuff. While over here we are posturing our cav around the flank, avoiding the Arc of Fire on the Hammer of Witches. Now my opponent actually made a good decision here. He did posture the Hammer of Witches up on this little lip here. So although it's still a suboptimal arc, he obviously can't get a perfect arc anywhere. It did mean that no matter which angle I came in from, he would have at least some opportunity to fire, possibly. Now, unfortunately for him, though, he does not pivot to engage my cavalry here, and so he's actually focused on my infantry. He's actually pounded these stars pretty well. He's got 8 models on these guys, 3 over there, so, you know, it's some damage, and it counts. And eventually, I obviously do have no way of bringing them back. I don't have any Revivification Crystals, any heals, anything of that sort, so nothing to help him with. Now, as we do close the gap here, you can see the good old Skink Chief is going to start picking up off Spearmen. Not really what you want him wasting his time with. I think this cannonball was actually intended for the Skink Chief, but it whiffs and kills like 10 skinks there, which is kind of sad. But over here we are flanking around with cav as we do start posturing on this flank with the cav. And you can see me pulling the skink cohorts over to this flank, trying to get in on the Royal Griff fights. Now, certainly we're not going to be doing a number on the Royal Griff fights, but we can potentially tie them down. Over here, nice little Wind Blast does some damage to the Silver Bullets, but does not take any models. Perhaps I should have overcast it. Regardless, my opponent has taken a bit of a beating on these. They did lose like 1200 HP. And we're able to bog down the Royal Griff fights and start applying some major pressure to them. And there is some friendly fire coming in from the handguns as well, because skinks, of course, are pretty small. Though my opponent there was actually aiming at my Feral Cold Ones, who do start rampaging and are going to pile into the fight here against the Royal Griff fights, which is not really what I want, but oh well, what can you do? In the meantime, the fight is kicking off on both flanks. The Cold One Spear Riders getting caught out by the Demigryph Knights. Not what I had intended. I wanted the Feral Cold Ones to take that charge, but it doesn't work out. But we do cast Curse of the Midnight Wind, debuffing these guys whole bunches and pulling the Horde Ones into the fray, who are then going to be able to start pounding them. Earthblood does go down, but the Lore of Lifecaster is starting to get worked over a little bit here. He's not where he wants to be in life. You can see protection going down with Shield of the Old Ones. And in the meantime, the Feral Cold Ones are managing to sneak around the flank. While here in the pits, this fight is ongoing. Now, certainly the Royal Griff fights still holding up very strongly. But at the same time, we do have Horned Ones in there. We do have Cold One Spear Riders in there who are a very good counter to them. And they are all backed by those Skink cohorts, which are helping them immensely. In the meantime, over here, the Chameleon Skinks wasting a lot of ammo on the Spearmen. But we do manage to pull our Horned Ones clear and get them on top of these handguns, which is going to pull them offline and start shutting down my opponent's supporting fire. In the meantime, the Chameleon Skinks continue pounding away at the Jade Wizard, who is now trying desperately to stop the cannon crew from being shut down, so you can see that advantage. Now, my opponent actually won this fight here, with Karl diving in, despite the fact that I got cold-blooded on these guys. He did manage to rat off the Cold One Spear Riders. They're down to 10 models, and now obviously have no heals. The Demigryph Knights still in some shape. They got 15 models and about a third of their HP around. Actually, maybe like 40%, so a little bit more than that. Carl Friends is here kicking these Horned Ones rear. Perhaps they can win. I don't know. They do some decent damage, but still, he's holding up pretty well. So my opponent doing pretty well on this flank, but over here, while he is able to rampage my Horned Ones, his Royal of Griffites are also starting to buckle, and these spears are just not going to be able to hold out too well. We're going to start pulling our Slaane's Mage Priest over to the flank, and you can see the Sarge Warriors getting these optimal fights. We actually wipe out so many of the Silver Bullets here, forcing a complete rout as the spears charge in, getting a fresh charge into the Royal of Griffites, and they're going to start doing major work once again. The Horned Ones in the meantime do extricate themselves, so they're going to be able to get a new charge in, and the Skin Cohorts are going to be able to get a new charge in as we cast a Harmonic Convergence on these guys, keeping them in the fight just a little longer, getting just a little bit more performance out of them. In the meantime, the Feral Cold Ones are coming back in, being a nuisance. We are able to force off these spears, and we are able to sort of pressure so many of my opponent's troops here very, very effectively, start pushing these spears back with the help of the Skinks, and start pounding these Royal Turf Fights pretty well. And you can see these guys down to 9 models now, not really able to heal despite the life bloom going down at the moment. Over here, my opponent desperately throwing his Demigryphs into the fight against the Slaane's Mage Priest, but we are going to pull our Cold One Spear Riders in there to rear charge them. And they are being picked at by this King Chief over here, who is unfortunately being obstructed, but nonetheless, we are able to just bog these guys down and start tearing them to shreds. Another banishment does go down on basically the only remaining viable target. And you can see Carl here getting hit with a regrowth, which is going to bring him to completely fresh, so minty fresh Carl there. But it's only Carl at this point. Essentially, my opponent's army is gone. His spearmen here are going to start routing due to that banishment. Over here, his Royal Dwarf Griffites are going to be completely destroyed. Over here, the Life Jade Wizard overrun by Feral Cold Ones. The R of Quetzal going down, buffing all these troops up, keeping them in the fray. And over here, with the Royal Dwarf Griffites routed, the Horned Ones are able to pursue them. The Spear White Riders still around kicking. With so much cav on the field, any break that occurs, my opponent is going to start suffering badly. We're going to be able to run them down. A little bit of a misplay out here on my part. I didn't have the Chameleon Kings pursue the handguns off the field, and I didn't have any units chase the Silver Bullets all the way off the battlefield, but sometimes you can't get everything you want. And although Carl here is desperately trying to get through, he is being swamped by Cold One Spear Riders, while over here, the Slaane's Mage Priest is cackling wildly, just hovering around on his toilet seat, as poor Carl here is writhing and surrounded by a bunch of angry dinos, and he's not going to last too long here. He's not going to be able to stick around. And at this point, my opponent basically has no troops on the field. It's just a handful of infantry on the periphery, and a full shatter is going to take place. So well played to my opponent here, Johan Hansen. I do think that his build was actually decent. That's why I really like. I thought this was a good match to showcase this build, because I think this is a build that can work out against very solid Empire compositions. Empire has a lot of things going for it against Lizards. Lizards honestly don't have much of an advantage, if any advantage, really, against Empire. Let's just have Chameleon Skinks, which are pretty good in this matchup. They've got an advantage in the basic infantry matchup, but they're paying a huge premium because of how expensive SARs are. And sure, they've got an advantage in monsters, but Empire's the hard counter to monsters. Empire's black powder, stacked on top of very respectable heavy cavalry and cheap chaff, as well as some respectable troops. Like great swords will just outtrade things like Sarge Warriors for almost the same cost. The fact that Empire has that sort of lineup of units, it makes it just so potent in this matchup, and that's why I really like going wide like this. You can see Skink Core is actually delivering very well here, and they're such a good unit to saturate those cavalry fights, to saturate the brawls in the periphery, and to give you a tool to really... they really fulfill a very useful task. They're a really, really great unit. Obviously, the Cold One Spear Riders, the Feral Cold Ones, all these guys, they didn't get the greatest kill counts, but they were killing Demigryph Knights, they were killing Hammer of the Witches, so they were killing Carl, which is a selection of very important tasks that I needed somebody to do, and these units did it ideally. There are other opportunities I think you can mess around with, and as far as the cavalry builds go, you could probably go with like 4 Cold One Spear Riders, just drop the Horn Ones down, downgrade them in favor of more Cold One Spear Riders. Now, certainly Cold One Spear Riders are much squishier, much less effective against infantry, but they are cheaper, and that would open up another 800 gold to use on either Sarge Warriors or two Skin Cores with javelins. There's a whole bunch of things you can mess around with at that stage of at that point. You might even be able to squeeze in like an extra Chameleon Skink and like some more like one more unit of Skink cohorts, something of that nature. So obviously this isn't the end all be all of builds, but I do think it's a very respectable build. Skink Chiefs was something I was mostly dabbling with. That's actually something I don't usually do with this composition, but due to the fact that I want to be able to control my cav better, I decided to go in with the Skink Chiefs. Normally I do try to cram in some Chameleon Skinks, but then again the Skink Chiefs are cheaper, which is definitely nice as well than Chameleon Skinks. For my opponent's build, it's pretty solid, to be honest. I don't have too many comments to make on it. I think that now this might just be me, but I'm not particularly fond of bringing artillery against Lizardmen. I know it can be very potent, and you can potentially whittle them down pretty effectively. But I find that generally you're going to just want to push in. Lizardmen are going to rush you. You're going to push in, and you're going to engage in close quarters no matter what. So I find just having overwhelming point-blank firepower is generally going to be more productive. And that might just be me, but do keep in mind that this was actually some testing we did with some of the people on the forums. There was some testing as far as artillery fire goes. Turns out cannons have about a 30-second delay between shots. The Hammer of Witches will probably have a slightly faster rate of fire, but it's still a very long delay. So the DPS output is just nowhere comparable to a unit of handguns. And so personally, I like to go more with lots of short-range DACA. It also gives you better opportunities to overwhelm things like Chameleon Skinks, which are a good counter in this matchup. Now, sure, your opponent has more opportunities to breach your line, and just get on top of your shooting. But I personally just like the point defense a little better. But otherwise, I think this build is pretty respectable. I would probably try to kit out Carl a little better. Probably dump the Hammer of Witches, perhaps downgrade a unit of Demigryph Knights to Reiksguard, and then try to get something like, or maybe just downgrade, get rid of the Royal Sacrifice. Just bring a single unit of Demigryph Knights with halberds. Get like 2 units of Reiksguard in there. Maybe like a unit of handguns. Somehow like rework the build a little bit. So you have a little more firepower. So you've got some more heavy cav to run down things like Chameleon Skinks and rear charge things like Saurus Warriors and stop enemy cav all over the place. That's running amok all over the place. And yeah, that would be my recommendation. But that's just my 2 cents on it. It also lets you bring a different lore if you want. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on the matter. But regardless, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it entertaining and informative. If you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, any suggestions, as usual, don't hesitate to post them. I will do my best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.